Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. We had an ice storm down in the Detroit area, so my biggest concern was getting on my driveway because it slopes up. So I was out there late last night making sure I salted it and all like that, but it was warming up this morning. So thank you for coming. What I'm going to, a little bit of my background, it's already been mentioned to you. I still engage in some consulting work, mainly with houses of worship. It's a shame that we have to worry about emergency preparedness in our houses of worship, but that's the state where we're at today. My presentation, I'm going to give you a brief history of the U.S. Secret Service, and I'm going to give you experiences that I've had while protecting the presidents and foreign heads of state. During my career, I protected 6 presidents, starting with President Kennedy, uh, Johnson, President Nixon, President Ford, and President Carter, and ending up with President Reagan. I was involved in 5 presidential campaigns, and an agent usually judges their retirement by how many campaigns they've gone through because they're very taxing. The campaigns I worked on, you didn't get any days off from the time people started a campaign until the election period. This is President Nixon. You can see how the crowds are around the candidate. This is President Reagan in Detroit on a Labor Day campaign stop. Very interesting. We made with 22 cars in our motorcade. We stopped in Hamtramck for a little backdoor barbecue. If you can imagine, 22 cars and buses in a neighborhood for a small family affair. And we took up all the street. When we left, we're going down the street. We make a left-hand turn. All of a sudden, I'm in the lead car, and I hear this car screaming out of a garage. And we thought it was a hit on the motorcade. One of our vehicles from the motorcade went and just rammed him and drove him out of the way. It happened to be a Polish teenager from the neighborhood that was out there trying to squeal his tires and didn't know our motorcade was coming along. We offered to pay for the car, but his dad said, no, the kid has to learn a lesson, let him pay for it. So, a little bit different we'd find today. This is very interesting because here's President Ford on top of the limousine. Thank goodness that the driver doesn't have an itchy foot and takes off, because you know what would happen to him. Here is President Ford also with John Wayne. Now you have to be concerned of who the person you're protecting, who they're with, because what would be the threats against John Wayne? Well, probably very, very little. Although we had a visit of a president coming into Detroit, and we found out there was a threat to kill Coleman Young. An individual had been out, and he went to a big box store to purchase a weapon, and the young clerk did not want to sell it to him. He went to his manager, and his manager said, sell him the rifle. And the next day, the young man called the Secret Service, said, I'm really uncomfortable with that. When we got into the person's background, we found out that he wanted to kill Coleman Young. He had been out at a golf course in Ann Arbor shooting the rifle, and he was on the loose. And here we had Coleman Young and the president going to be together. Fortunately, we were able to make an arrest on the individual about an hour before they arrived. So you have to be also concerned about who the protectee is with. We had another case where the president and Kissinger were going into the Los Angeles area, and an individual shot the father of one of the Lennon sisters. Her father was a golf pro. He wanted to marry one of the Lennon girls, and he felt the father wouldn't allow him. The father was a golf pro. He went out to the golf range and shot and killed him. And he also was making threats to kill the president and Kissinger. So we went to quite an extensive investigation on that, could not locate him, and about a week after the president had left the area, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department found an abandoned car up in the mountain, and the individual had committed suicide and was dead. But these are the type of things that you run into when your protectee is going to be with someone else. You can see Jimmy Carter up on the limousine. People are trying to shake his hand. Hopefully, they'll let go and not pull him off. Here you have Jerry Parr. Jerry Parr's the agent that pushed Reagan into the limousine. He's holding on to the the president. You have agents around the car. Their hands are on the car, so they know where it's at all times. Because if you're not touching that car, you can wander away from it and it leaves a gap. Or if you get too close, that big armored limousine is going to roll over your foot, and that does happen. But the best place that you can see, Jerry's holding on to the president's belt because he's not going to go anyplace. Hopefully, at least unless he loses his pants, you're going to hold on to that belt, and you're going to have good control. I was involved in 4 presidential inaugurations. I planned the inauguration of Jimmy Carter prior to leaving Washington. You can see this is Eisenhower. Here's what his inauguration parade looked like. You can see how it's grown, and look at it here. All the entourage that's around the presidential inauguration. That shows you how the threat activity and the various threats that can happen have occurred. The inauguration route is 1.7 miles. It starts at the U.S. Capitol, ends up at the White House. You have high-level coverage. You have barricades that have to be set out. You have manhole covers that have to be, or manholes that have to be swept. Covers have to be welded down. And every once in a while, you get someone like this young lady without any clothes on, and hopefully you can remove her out too much exposure, coming along. Any big event like the inauguration, the important thing is communications. This is a communications operation. Every federal agency, every police agency, every military unit is in that location. So if a threat comes in from any area, that can be handled and it can go back out to the detail so the detail can handle it, make some arrangements on how to counter that threat. This is a magazine article in Parade in 1969. I only found that a few years ago. And this is what Truman told President Nixon. The Secret Service is the only boss that the president really has. Well, that's stretching it a little bit, but it did, when I look back, it made one situation I was in a little bit easier. It was during the inauguration of President Nixon. I was responsible for coordinating all the threat activities, the demonstrations, anything that could interfere with the movement of the president. The detail was responsible for the physical security. So what happened is the president gets sworn in, went in the back of the Capitol and had lunch with the leaders of the House and the Senate. And then after lunch, on his way out, they start the inaugural parade. Well, on his way out, I had received word that there were about 10 to 15,000 demonstrators, anti-Vietnam, heading for the parade route. Well, we did not have enough resources, although we had military on standby. So I had to tell the president and Vice President Agnew, plus the detail leader, look, we're going to have to hold. Well, what you do is any movement, you have a holding room. So the president and the vice president went in that holding room. And I was in there with them. And you have a White House phone that travels every place around the world. You pick the phone up, and right away, the operator says the White House. So I picked it up, connect me with a command post. I said, you have to let me know we can start the parade. Well, under Posse Comitatus, you cannot authorize the movement of federal troops and to take police action unless there's a series of notification and requests going to the mayor of Washington, D.C. Well, that took about 5 minutes to do, and we got the military troops in there, and you can see how they're standing to hold the demonstrators back. So I turned to the president and vice president, who were very relaxed. They went over and they had sat on a couch with their feet propped up on a coffee table, and here I am. They're looking at me, and they're talking, and I said, Mr. President, we can start the parade. So as we started down, you can see the limo with the agents around it. Well, all of us, and here are the demonstrators. Well, all of a sudden, they started to throw rocks and bottles from over the crowd. And they're banging off the car and bouncing all around. You're looking up and worrying about if you can stop it or you're going to get one in the mouth or something like that. You can see how everybody's looking to watch the stuff coming in at them. They made it by. No agent got hit. Of course, the president is in an armored car. And then the police moved in and made some arrests. And so we went about our business. I was responsible for the planning of Jimmy Carter's inauguration in January 20th, 1977. Now, the president will walk the parade route, in a limousine, and he'll get out and walk by the Treasury building. Well, President Carter is sworn in, but he did not go in and have lunch. He just went and had a really quick meeting. On his way out, the detail leader calls me and he says, Rad, he says, the president wants to walk the entire route. So Dick Kaiser, the detail leader, and myself, we went in to talk to the president, and the conversation was something like this. You told us you were only going to walk the Treasury building. He said, no, I want to walk the entire route. And he said, well, let me ask you this. Does anybody know I'm going to walk the entire route? We said, no. And he said, well, isn't the best security that a surprise? And we said, well, yes. And he said, well, if I'm going to want to walk the entire route, no one knows I'm going to do it. It's going to be a surprise. So what's the problem? Well, you guessed it, we walked the entire route. Because remember the dialogue you used to get back and forth with your kids, no, you can't go to the movie, yes, I want to, and all like that. That doesn't happen when you're talking to the president. You just say a few words and that's it. So we walked the entire route. I'm right here. That's the detail leader. Behind him, you can see Amy Carter got out, would walk a while, then she would jump back in the limousine because Amy Carter was very young. And then all of a sudden, an individual breaks from the crowd, even though you have all this security. The individual right here with the glasses is Mary Boondorf that grabbed the weapon from Squeaky Fromm when she tried to assassinate Ford. Well, you can see they were able to stop her. The president's looking that way. Well, now we have the presidents now are walking the entire route. So this is what we didn't want to have happen. We tried to discourage the president, but he ended up doing it. Secret Service was formed in 1865 because 1/3 of the currency in circulation was counterfeit. There was a meeting on April 14th, 1865, between the Secretary of the Treasury and President Lincoln. You can see there currencies, there were different colors and shapes and size, so it was hard to determine what was counterfeit. Well, if you remember from history, on April 14th, 1865, President Lincoln went to Ford's Theater and John Wilkes Booth assassinated him. Fired a shot on the left side of his head, right above the ear. This is the Derringer that he used. John Wilkes Booth had 2 of them. The other one has never been found. This is the one he used, but look how small it is. To think that weapon, look what it did to change our history in this country. Then in 1881, President Garfield was assassinated going through a railroad station. In 1901, McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo. When the assassin came up, had a weapon, had a bandage wrapped around it, went to shake his hand, shot him in the stomach. At that time, the Secret Service was given presidential protection. However, in 1908, the powers were limited. Due to the Teapot Dome scandals, which looks like a teapot out in Wyoming, where there was a lot of oil, the Secretary of Interior and some congressmen were involved in fraud, and they got arrested by the Secret Service. Congress didn't like that. They thought Teddy Roosevelt was using the Secret Service as his own investigative agency. So what they did in their wisdom, all right, we'll limit the powers of the Secret Service. Well, in 1912, a dozen agents left the Secret Service and formed the FBI. So that's the history behind that. Secret Service protects the President of the United States and his wife, Vice President and their spouse, and also children. This is Amy Carter. When I was in Washington, D.C., we had a detail with Amy when she was going to school. There's a really cute cartoon. I'll never forget it. She's taking an exam, and there's 2 agents standing behind her and helping her with the exam. And she turns around and asks him for one of the agents a question. He says, I don't know. So I don't think that was very complimentary on the intelligence of people. Anyway, it was a cute cartoon. And then protects former presidents for their entire lifetime as the wife of a former president. Like Mrs. Clinton is receiving protection. That's quite interesting because when she was Secretary of State, she also got Secret Service protection, even though the State Department usually provides it for the Secretary of the State. It's done 24/7 at the White House, and it's done overseas. Never gives up. And then June the 5th, 1968, in fact, I was working liaison with the Robert Kennedy's office, who was running for president He was out in California. He had just won the Democratic nomination, and then he was assassinated. And Secret Service was given protection of candidates after the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Secret Service also protects the foreign head of state. This is Queen Elizabeth's visit in Washington, D.C. in 1975. I'm right here. My hair is a little bit thicker and darker than, and I did the advance for the Queen. It was quite an interesting stop. Now, when we were doing the advance for the Queen, the British authorities felt that we were doing it too strict, too tight. Because they said in the UK, there's an aura of the Queen. No one's close to the Queen. There's this kind of magic bubble around her. And we kept saying, no, it doesn't happen that way in the US. People like autographs and be touched and all like this. And we have to do it tight. And so they requested a meeting with the ambassador for protocol, which happened to be Shirley Temple Black, the movie star. So what happened is the ambassador Black and myself, we held a meeting at the Blair House, sitting on one side of the table with Ambassador Black, and the British people were on the other side. They gave their position, I gave mine, and at the end they said to the ambassador, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to follow the advice of the U.S. Secret Service, which was good because in her stop, like going into Philadelphia, we had over 300,000 people that were along the route, and the crowds were tremendous and very hard pressed. So the Queen arrived on a British airline at Andrews Airport. And this is how a foreign head of visit usually goes. She landed at Andrews, and then we motorcade down to the White House. And this is not the Queen's motorcade, but kind of typical. I would be in the lead car, and then the Queen would be in there, and security and staff cars behind. Now, we did by motorcade because if we went by helicopter, there's no place to land the helicopters because it was 1976, bicentennial period. Washington was flooded with visitors and that. So we had no place to land a helicopter. There's an event on the south lawn of the White House. You couldn't land it there. So we drove down. As we're coming out of the base, I get a radio call. The police are chasing some bank robbers toward the main gate. And, of course, we're not going to go there, and there's shots fired. That's how the call came. So we went out the back entrance. When you arrived at the White House, the motorcade back here, I received a radio call to contact headquarters. The press wanted to know why we endangered the life of the Queen by bringing her out in front of that situation. Of course, we didn't. We brought her out another way, so no problem with that one. And the national anthem is played for both countries. Then there's a walking of the military line, and then back up to the second floor balcony to wave to the crowd, and then inside to have lunch. And during that time, Mrs. Ford gave the Queen a tour of the White House. And then we went over to the Blair House. The Queen rested, and our next stop was up at the Lincoln Memorial. But what we did is we set barricades on either side. We had the crowd on either side so the Queen could go up. We had the limousine motorcade down at the base. So the Queen goes up, lays a wreath, and as you come back up, I indicate to the detail, well, let's play her a little bit loose. Let's don't be too tight and give her some freedom. Well, this is a picture in the UK. You'll notice that no one is reaching out toward the Queen. Well, when she came down the line at the Lincoln Memorial, it was different. People were trying to pat her on the shoulder and ask her for her autograph. I even heard someone say, Queenie, how are you doing, you know? And I was in 4-H. I had a black Angus that I named Queenie. So I mean, that's not very complimentary, right? So we moved her kind of back from the crowd, and she's a little bit uptight. You could tell the way she reacted. But she gets down by the limousine, and here's these park policemen on beautiful horses, and she being a horse lady, she goes over and she starts to talk to one of the park policemen who was Mr. Personality, and boy, they got along very well. Getting the limousine back to the Blair House, and I didn't hear anything further because the ambassador, certain things happen, and the ambassador Black called me a couple of times. She says, Rad, we just got this problem. What do you have to say about it? So there's all these little things that come up during the visit. But here's the Queen. We took her over to the Smithsonian later on, where she met Vice President Rockefeller. And then that night, which is typical on a foreign head of visit, there's a dinner at the White House. And you can see this was since there were so many people touring the White House during the bicentennial period, the Mrs. Ford had a tent, if you can call that a tent, put in the backyard. But she did something smart. She raised it up because she had been to an event on the south lawn of the White House during a rainstorm. And here she was walking around in high heels with a dress, and it got muddy and all like that. She said, "That's not going to happen again." So you can see it's raised up off the ground. Luckily, she did that because that night it rained so heavy. We, in fact, and the wind was blowing, we thought maybe we might have to move it inside to the White House, but we kept it outside. Here the Queen is meeting Cary Grant. The foreign head of the visiting head of the country will give a list to the White House on certain people that they would like to have in attendance. You had Helen Hayes, Julie Harris, you had Cary Grant, Willie Mays, Telly Savalas, actors like that. Uh, so there's the dinner, and there's the introduction speeches, and then afterwards there's a toast, and then there's a dance with the president. And you won't believe the song that the military band played, "The Lady is a Tramp." That's what they played for it. So at least the Secret Service didn't get blamed for the selection of the music. Well, anyway, this is a little event that happened on Spiro Agnew when he was vice president. I did the advance in San Juan, Puerto Rico in 1971. And we were concerned about the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. If you remember, they tried to assassinate Truman at the Blair House, and they made an attack on congressmen in the House of Representatives. So going down there, what we did is we brought a whole group of agents. It was a governor's conference, so we had governors from all the states in the U.S. down there, and they brought their state police security, which was good. So we really buttonholed it up and made it real tight. Picture this at night. This is where the helicopter would land. The vice president went to dinner with the governor of Puerto Rico. And as he's coming out, I'm standing in that area, and all of a sudden I hear boom, boom, then another explosion. I look on the beach, and the lights are going out. We found out later that the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party had put bombs at some of the transformer stations and blew them up to shut our electricity out. But anyway, we had auxiliary electricity. We flew back. The vice president left the next afternoon, and I stayed over to get details finished up. And in the morning, I get a telephone call. This is the federal building where the Secret Service office was at. I get a telephone call that they found a bomb outside the Secret Service office. What the agents did is we carried radios and batteries and some extra water in those Pan Am flight bags. Well, it wasn't a smart move on our part. We were under observation by some of the terrorist organizations. What they did is they packed explosives in that bag, and they put it outside the Secret Service office. The secretary came in about 7:45. She saw the bag. She pushed it off to the side, thinking that an agent's down getting coffee from downstairs. 5 minutes to 8, or 10 minutes after 8, a messenger shows up, sees it, opens it up. It's loaded with explosives. And so he sounds the alarm. The bomb squad comes, and they deactivated the bomb. The bomb was set to go off at 8 o'clock. The man saw it at 8:10, so why did the bomb go off? Give you an idea. Here's how the bomb was designed. There was a piece of wire, a hole had been drilled out at 12 o'clock, and a wire had been put in so that when the hour hand came around, it would make contact because you had a circuit. You had that going to a battery, to a detonator, to the dynamite, and then wired on the back. So when that hour hand came around and touched, you had a circuit, and the bomb should have gone off. But here's what happened. When they drilled the hole to glue the wire, a crystal got lodged at 10 minutes to 8. And the hour hand got stopped. It did not go off. So we were very fortunate. Because when the bomb was removed, the clock was ticking. And we said, geez, that bomb should have gone off. Well, under laboratory examination, the piece of crystal had dislodged when the bomb was being moved. We could see where there was glue residue where it was at 10 minutes too. So there would have been enough explosive to destroy half that federal building. Kind of similar to the McNamara building. President Ford was sworn in 1973, and it was a interesting time because I was here in Detroit. He loved to go out to U of M, and because he played football, as you know, at U of M, and he'd get out there, and Bo would be with him, and he'd be talking, and Bo would put his arm around him. He'd say to the football team, "Men, this man played football at U of M, and he is now the president of the United States." And he'd say it, and Ford usually visited prior to the Ohio State game. I could never understand how Michigan could lose to Ohio State with that type of, you know, movement. But Ford really loved that. That was kind of a nice thing for him to do. And here, give you an idea of some things that you have to watch out for that aren't necessarily security matters. Here is President Ford at the Kingdome, the All-Star game. Danny Kaye, the owner of the Seattle Mariners, Ford and Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner of baseball. Well, we were doing, I was the agent in charge of Seattle, so the security came under me. And we were concerned about this lady, Morgana Morgan. You know, she liked to run out and kiss ball players, especially Brett, you know, the Kansas City. Well, sure enough, presidents were at the game. You can see where he's sitting in the front row. She runs out, smacks, gives him a big kiss, and starts heading over toward Ford. Well, we stopped her, and she didn't get to Ford. She was arrested by the. I think she had better statistics than some of the ball players that were in the All-Star game. But anyway, and then we had Barry Bremen, great imposter. Barry was a insurance salesman in Southfield, Michigan, and he did all types of things. We were at the Super Bowl with Vice President Bush, and here I am talking to him. We're up in the box where he viewed the game. But we were concerned about Barry because Barry, you see him in the Yankee uniform. We encountered him at that All-Star game in Seattle. And Barry's out taking batting practice and fielding with the American All-Star team. And when he comes in and the photographer is going to take a picture of the American All-Star team, he notices one extra ball player, and it's Barry. And Barry gets arrested. We arrested him for trespassing. But you know what happened? Reggie Jackson, who was an All-Star player from the Yankees, shows up and he forgot his uniform. Well, here's Barry's in jail, so what's he going to do with his Yankee uniform? Well, he gave it to Reggie Jackson, right? So it worked out well. It's some of the things, this is what Barry did. You know, he made a lot of money, you know, because the notoriety he got. And here he is, and then the San Diego Chicken. Well, at that All-Star game, at the Super Bowl game, rather, at the Kingdom, at the Silverdome, we're really looking for Barry. So we're at the players' entrance, and a limousine pulls up, and the San Diego Chicken gets out. And the agent said, "Take your headdress off." "Oh, I'm the San Diego Chicken. What do you mean, take my headdress?" "No, take it off," right? Well, finally he took it off, and who is it? It's Barry, right? Well, he says in the Detroit newspaper, he said, "At least the Secret Service was better to me this time because he just sent me home. They didn't send me to jail." But unfortunately, he died a few years ago. But those are the type of distractions you have to look for, you know. Well, during the football game, I'm with the head of security for the NFL. There's a bomb threat on the Bengals locker room just before halftime. And he turns to me and he says, "There's a bomb threat. What should we do?" He said, "Send the team in there." Because we had swept it. We had it posted security-wise because we knew the vice president might go in there. So, you know, it would have been a heck to have a Super Bowl game where the team's in the middle of the field at halftime because they can't get in the locker room with a threat. Air Force One, beautiful paint scheme. Uh, it's nice to see it land when you're in a foreign country. It's better to see it take off, so he's out of there. But how to get Air Force One? This was a plane that Eisenhower flew in, tail number 610. He was on that aircraft in the southeast part of the United States. The air traffic controller gets that Air Force 610 mixed up with an Eastern Airlines 610. So here, the Air Force pilot gets on the air and says, "Hereafter, call me Air Force One." And so whenever the president's on an aircraft, it's Air Force One. If he's on the Marine chopper, Marine One. And if there's a vice president, it's Marine 2. The first lady's on it, it will go by the tail number. You can see the helicopter landing. Beautiful sight as you take off, go around and head to Andrews Air Force Base to get on Air Force One to leave the city. You can see at nighttime, very beautiful coming in. Not so nice when it's foggy and you don't know whether they're going to pick up the Washington Monument or not. It gets a little tricky. Here's a landing in the winter and then a takeoff in the winter, kicking up all the snow. If you happen to be a guest on the Marine Chopper, you would have a placard with your name on it. So there's no understanding where you're going to be. The Secret Service, they'd have their placards. The president would sit here, first lady there, are the guests of the president. So if you would get on uh, Chuck Sharp, your name would be there, so you'd have your seat, right? And then Secret Service would have theirs. That helicopter is taken around the world. Here, one of these white tops was taking a group of agents over the Grand K in 1973. The pilot landed short in the water, and these helicopters go down nose first. 4 agents got out, and 1 agent didn't, and he died in the crash. And after that, what they do, they put you in a cage and drop you 30 feet down in the water and flip you upside down. You'd have to learn how to get out of it. Lesson learned, unfortunately, after something happened. This is the limousine, 1942. The agent in charge of the detail got a special made limousine for the president by Ford Motor Company, because up to that time, the president rode around in Al Capone's armored car. And I didn't think it was, so he didn't think it was a good idea to have him riding around in a gangster's car. So they had that made. That limousine's loaded onto a transport plane, fastened down. We used to ride, agents used to ride that plane, but there were, they stopped doing it because ear problems and all like that, because it's not pressurized. Here's the plane taking off. There was a visit to Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 1996 with President Clinton, and the plane took off and it crashed. It ran into a mountain. There was only 1 agent on board. Usually you'd have at that time maybe 20 or 25 agents on board. This is the monument that's still there for it. What's the theory of protection? Well, it's rings of security. It's like your home. You put locks on your door, you have lighting, what have you. Those rings are set up to identify anybody that tries to get to the person you're protecting, and if they do, they would cover them and evacuate to a safe zone. You can see here's a ring of security around President Ford. You can see again how we're with President. You can see shaking hands. Now that ring kind of breaks down because you have a crowd. So you're watching these hands, because the hands will kill you and the eyes won't. So that's really what you're concentrating on, are the hands. The first shot is a free one. When you hear when Kennedy was shot, well, there were 3 shots fired in X amount of minutes. But the first shot's a free one. That's an attempt on Wallace. Well, Wallace got shot, as did an agent in the throat. You can see that's a shot being taken at President Reagan, where McCarthy got shot in the stomach. You react to that one, and then you constantly expect that first act of violence. You're always ready for that first act, and the concern you have is, are you going to act accordingly? Like when McCarthy got shot in the stomach, it's claimed when one of the agents spoke to him when he's laying on the ground, the first question that he had in mind, I hope I didn't jump out of the way. That's the first thought. I hope I did my job. So here's the cover. Squeaky Fromm is showing a gun to get President Ford. Now they're evacuating him from the area, as Larry Boondorf right here has grabbed the weapon and taken it away from her, and she's being arrested. This is the automatic that she had. She didn't load it right. It wouldn't have gone off anyway. Of course, Larry didn't know that, and he was able to get his hand in between the weapon and the hammer and prevent it so it didn't come back down. Secret Service could not do its job without the support of the state police, local police, and county sheriff. Because this motorcade being led, see the motorcycles are local jurisdiction. You can see all the support that's needed. These are the agents standing post outside. If there's an agent in here, President was talking here, there'd be someone with him and at the doors and then around the building. You just hope that you get a call that the president's left, so you're not standing out there all day and he's already gone. Because you can't leave your post unless you're relieved. This picture kind of gets me in a way, because imagine you've been out protecting the president all day, and which you can do because of the way the shifts are set up. So you get off of the helicopter, you approach this football stadium, the lights, people are screaming and all like that, and you're trying to pick up what's going on around her. Even though you've read all the briefing papers and that prior to getting there. It's nothing like you actually being there. And so it's a big adrenaline rush. You're taught to expect the unexpected. Now, this happened to me in Washington, D.C. Remember, the Buddhist monks had burned themselves against the war in Vietnam. We had a woman who burned herself in '65 in Detroit in November and March, in November that year at the Pentagon, and then at the United Nations. Well, I'm on duty. I'm at the White House. President Johnson is at the ranch, and there's two of us at the White House. And we get a call from the White House operator that I received a call from the news media that says an individual by this name says he's going to burn himself in front of the White House. So I told the other agent, I'm going to go out to the Northwest Gate and check to see that everything's in place. And Park Police came, so we're looking at how we can be alert to what's going on around us. And I leave the Northwest Gate to walk down in front of the White House, and there's a lady with her holding the arm of her child, dressed in their Easter outfits, and there's other people on the sidewalk. And I look down toward the other gate. I see an individual walking down holding two grocery bags. And as he gets closer, I notice that they appear to be stained on the bottom. And as I get from here to about where you're at, I notice that he's holding matches, getting ready to strike them. And so I said his name, and he looks up, and then I dove after him. And we're fighting around, and if you've ever tried to pull somebody's hands away, it's pretty hard to do. So I was able to get him down like this. Gasoline went over him and went over me, and we're rolling around on the ground in the gasoline. And a park policeman comes by and helps me handcuff him. And this was a newspaper account of it. Now, it says that he had already dosed himself with gasoline, but he didn't do it until I tried to remove it from his arms. Very fortunate we were able to do that, because I think it might have started a rash of other burnings. And also, when I think about the woman with a child behind me with that gasoline on the ground, how they might have been burned and put to death. I did get the only problem I had that day is I was wearing my Robert Hall suit. Remember these suits? You could buy what? 2 pairs of pants, and for $39, you put something in your pockets and they would drag. Well, I was wearing this $34 special suit. I should have been wearing my $100 suit, because I could put a claim in for it being soaked with gasoline. But by the time I figured out depreciation, that in about $6, I would have got back. So I wadded it up and threw it away, because it would probably cost $100 for the government to process this, and I would have got another $34 suit. So I didn't want to do it. Summer White House, Hyannisport. I was assigned to that in the summer of '63. My wife was a figure skater. She was on the national team and what have you. So prior to us going there, Walter Wunsch, you remember him? He had a column, and he said that Nancy Heiss, the sister of Carol Heiss, who won the gold medal, was going to spend her honeymoon with the Kennedys in Hyannisport, which wasn't quite true. This is my wife, who trained at Michigan State, and that's Carol, her sister. And you can see the medals my wife had, and her sister won the gold medal and a bunch of other medals too. This is a nice picture, because they were in contact with that girl a number of years after that photograph was taken. My wife happened to go to Michigan State because they had an excellent summer skating program there. And this is on Parade Magazine. That's Carol, her sister. And then that's Nancy, again, with all the medals that she won. Well, fortunately, she broke her ankle right before the Olympics, didn't compete that year, so she was not on the team. The team's leaving for Brussels, Belgium in 1961, and the plane crashes, landing in Belgium. Lost the entire Olympic skating team. She lost a lot of friends in that on that crash, and she could have been on that plane, but the good Lord had other plans, I guess. So this is a house the Kennedys were in, and this is where we stayed, Old Milltown. We didn't exactly stay with the Kennedys. This was our. I mean, we could have. I think we could have. Probably that would fit into the pantry at the Kennedy residence. So there we are. Well, the president rented a house on Squaw Island. This is where the Secret Service had their command post. This is the windmill area. This is where the helicopter would land, bringing the president from Otis Air Force Base, and they would motorcade down to the residence, and then the president would change clothes and drive to his dad's place up where that area is. Now, we let him drive himself in that secure area. Otherwise, we wanted to drive. This is how the road looked. It was kind of rough. You can see him in the wheel of the car. But what happened is he would take off, and we had a hard time catching up with him because there's dirt flying all like that. We'd park this convertible under here. We had a security post there. So what we did is we took the keys out of his car. We put them down to that post. Well, he comes out, and I'm on this post down here, and I get on the White House phone, and I said, the president's going to get in the car, bring the follow-up car up. So I run the keys up to President Kennedy, and he looks at me, and he with a big smile like he always did, and he says, well, are the guys ready yet? You know? So he takes off, and we're able to get behind him. It was hard to put something over on him. So away we went, and all like that. This is John Jr. on the seaside of Squaw Island. A lot of animals around. This is Carolyn Kennedy. I had a situation where I was in the command post, and she came in, and she would sit at a table like this, and she'd draw pictures and all like that. This time she'd wad them up and drop them on the floor. Well, she got ready to leave, and I said, where are you going? Pick the papers up. And she looks at me, and she says, no. I said, pick the papers up. And she says me another no. And here I am, 20-some years of age, and I said, pick them up or I'm going to spank your bottom. She said, I'm going to tell my mother. So what? I didn't know about this, but I was back in Secret Service headquarters a while back, and the historian came to me, and it's a letter that Jackie Kenney had written to Clint Hill. And in that letter, she says, I'm telling you that the agents discipline John Jr. and Caroline like they should be, because I don't want you to take more or less any guff from them. So that's how she backed us up. So I'm sure Caroline went in, told her mother, and told her mother, so I'll take care of this. She wrote a letter to Clint Hill saying, stay with him. This is Maud Shaw. She was a nanny that took care of the children when they were, this is her down by the beach at Squaw Island where she's getting them in dressed. This is a dog that was given to the president by Khrushchev, and it was called Pachinko. And there's a little story in the Kennedy detail where I'm on post, and what the president liked to do when he came, he'd set some golf balls and he'd drive them into the ocean. Well, what we would do in the command post, we had rocks about the size of a golf ball, and we'd throw them. We taught the dog to pick the rocks up and come back to us. Well, here I'm on a post. President puts a golf ball down. The German Shepherd comes over, picks the golf ball up, brings it over to me, drops it at my feet, wants me to throw it. And the president looks over and he says, I wish you guys would be doing that. Again, pretty sharp guy. And so we stopped doing that, so the president didn't lose his golf ball. This is where the First Lady lost her the son, Patrick. This is the hospital. I'm right here. This is the hospital where she had the baby and spent some time. This is the president leaving with Mrs. Kennedy. President loved to go out on the presidential yacht up in Hyannisport. You can see here he is. You can see the chase boat, Secret Service chase boats behind him. This is what those chase boats look like. They were very, very fast boats. And Mrs. Kennedy would call up and she'd say, come in and take John Jr. out on the boat. So here he is sitting in the boat. He thinks he's driving it. So he loved military. And here he is, looking around and like that. Then I got assigned to the White House detail. I want to go over some of the visits we had during that time. But when the President Kennedy was elected, this individual, Pavlik, wanted to assassinate him. He did not like Catholics. And what he did is he strapped himself with explosives, and he went into church and made up his mind, I don't want to do it now. So he didn't blow himself up. But what happened is the president was staying at his dad's place, and when he came out of the door, he like this is Sonny. He came out, not the family wasn't dressed like this. Pavlik was in a car down the street. And he had put explosives in the car. He changed his mind. He had a detonator. He was going to drive it down and blow it up. But when he saw the president kiss the kids and Mrs. Kennedy, he changed his mind and he didn't do it then. But what he had done, like a lot of assassins do, he sent a letter to the White House. But he didn't have the right postage on it. He put his return address, and it got sent back to Vermont, where he was from. And the postmaster recognized him as kind of a nut. He opened it up and saw where the individual said, "I've killed the president-elect." So, of course, we put a lookout for him on that car. This police officer pulled him over, and you can see the explosive were in the back. He had a wire running up, and he had a plunger on it to set it off. And there he is. So these are some of the trips we took just before the assassination into Delaware and CIO convention, Cape Canaveral, and then the Miami Palm Beach. President went to Arlington Cemetery. You can see John Jr. with the president and laying the wreath. And then we went to the Black Watch performance. In fact, Caroline Kennedy said this was probably the last photograph taken of the family together, where they're watching the Black Watch perform. It's a military unit out of Scotland. You can see them sitting together. I'm back here someplace. We're moving the president back to the office. He gets to the office and says, I didn't thank the troopers from the Black Watch. He gets on their bus and spends about an hour and a half talking with them. And this was a big event for them. Then we had a press conference. He loved press conferences at the State Department. We boarded a helicopter, went up to Delaware, where he dedicated a Highway 95. In fact, I remember this because I sprained my ankle running from the backup chopper into where the president was. He's wearing a top coat. He usually didn't like a top coat, but it was really cold that day. And notice the look on the people's face. When Kennedy had the knack that when he met a crowd, he was really focused on them. It was like one-on-one. It wasn't like some presidents where it's kind of pressing the flesh and looking the other way and not really paying attention. Then we went to New York City in the motorcade, and this is how we like to do our motorcade. But as we're coming out, the president says to the detail leader, "Look, we need all this escort. Let's flow with traffic." So we couldn't talk him out of it, so we flow with traffic, which is ridiculous. We're stopping at stoplights and all like that. We get up on the interstate, and there's an older couple driving in their car, and here's a bunch of guys in a convertible with flat tops trying to move them off to the side. And he looks, and he's not going to let these young whippersnappers, young kids, get him out of the way. And we're trying to protect the limousine. There's some barrels on the road up ahead, and we hit a couple of them and pull them off to the side. And the gunman in the car says, "Enough of this." So he reaches out and he puts that Uzi in the windshield of the car. And the driver says, "I don't want any part of this." And he slams the brakes on and squealing tires. We get to the airport. Luckily, no one got hurt in that situation. And Kennedy says to the detail leader, what was going on? The detail leader told him. And he says, "I don't think that's a really good idea. I think we better have police escort." We said, "Well, thank you." So here we are. Then we're in a Cape Canaveral then. He gets out. He's going to meet von Braun, who developed, the German scientist, did a lot of work on the rockets. And then we move over, and he met the astronauts. And we have a big parade then in Tampa. Humongous crowds. You can see how thick they were. You can notice the agents on the back of the car and how they're with Kennedy. But you notice the agents aren't in the back of the car. Kennedy at that time says, "Look, I have to get reelected, and I don't want agents on the back of the car." So as a result, they got off the car, and as a result, in Dallas, they were not on the back of the car, unfortunately. Otherwise, they could have taken a bullet for the president. Here we are. This is looking from the follow-up car to the escorts. What happens is he would drive along, and he'd see a big crowd, and he'd stop the motorcade, and he'd get out, want to shake hands, and we'd be back in the motorcade. Here we are in the Armory in Tampa. Here I'm in the back getting off. We're stopping there to make our flight into Miami, where he has another event. See, it's been a long day for him. He's quite tired. And we arrived then back in Washington, D.C. I did not make the trip to Dallas. The follow-up car I was assigned to was behind him in Dallas. My wife was expecting a baby, so I was switched with another agent, and they kept me back. You can see it's cloudy. That bubble top was on the car. When the president arrives, the bubble top is off. He arrives at 11:40, and Dallas. It was only a 15-minute trip from Fort Worth into Dallas. He could have driven. We could have gone right straight to the convention hall, but they wanted to parade through Dallas because remember he was after votes. He wanted votes. So here he's greeting the crowd. This is the agent I trade places with, moving through the crowd. They depart 50 minutes later from for a 9.5 minute ride to the trademark. Here they're going down the avenue. You can see how the crowds were on each side. About 12:23. You can see the limousines moved over to the left. That's because the crowds were really thick and they wanted to move to the left to protect the president, but that exposed the president's wife. And what happened is Clint Hill, even though you're not supposed to be in the back of the car, he jumps off. You can see how he's hiding down to protect Mrs. Kennedy. Here they've made the turn, and about 12:30, the first shot is fired because you can see the agents looking back to the right at the book depository. Clint Hill then at the first shot, as he's looking across, he sees a second shot hit the president in the neck and the back, and he responds just about getting in the car when the third shot hit him in the head and exploded. These people watching don't even know what's happened. You can see where the limousine, the lead car, is falling back, and they're speeding to the hospital. And the agent's inside the car. And then, as we know, the president, I think, gets sworn in. Mrs. Kennedy would not leave Dallas unless the president's body was with her, and then Johnson would not have Air Force One take off unless Mrs. Kennedy was on it. So the Secret Service, there was a negotiation, and the Dallas coroner agreed that if the president's physician was with the body, he would allow it to be released. And so they left Washington, D.C., coming back, removing the president's body that's been taken to the Navy hospital. This is the funeral procession. Members of the Black Watch were invited by Mrs. Kennedy to come back to be part of the parade. I was at the Black Watch Museum several years ago. It's quite a tradition for them to be invited back. This is John Jr. saluting. Now, Mrs. Kennedy wanted us to teach John Jr. how to salute, so when the president got off the helicopter, he could salute. The only thing, he was always doing it with the left hand. And so he got fidgety during the memorial service, and Mrs. Kennedy had an agent take him back to a holding room, and he's working with her. Bob Foster's working with him. A Marine colonel comes by in his blue uniform and looks at him and says, "Son, this is the way you salute." And John Jr. picked it up, and then he came out and did that salute. This is the Eternal Flame. This book was written, the first book that really the agents, we had never talked about the assassination until this book was written in 1963, and we were invited up to the Kennedy Library to make a presentation on our thoughts and what had happened that day. And then Clint Hill came back to make a presentation at Greenfield Village. That's the limousine that Kennedy was in. It was changed and armored and all like that. That's Clint Hill, Paul Landis. Those were signed to Mrs. Kennedy and myself. This is a portrait. We had went through, the man that wrote the book went through about 1,600 photographs and came up with this painting. Now, all the agents on the detail at that time, we got a copy of that. And on the back is everyone that was on the detail and who was alive signed that by their name. And you can see why that picture was picked up. So anyway, that's the end. I hope I haven't gone over my time too much. Up here I have some handouts of other readings you might like, and some of the badges and other presidential ties. Anybody have any questions before we break? I know you probably want to go to lunch, so you never stand between people and lunch, right? Yes, sir. Yeah, when they're upstairs in the living quarters. Well, and that's a good question, because you can see the stress they're under, because there's always people that want their attention. About the only time when they're in their suite or when you're leaving with them and they're getting on the elevator, and as soon as they get downstairs, it's just, I don't know why. It's a very difficult job. I don't care what party you're for. It's just a hard job. Well, there'll be several cars, especially now in the motorcade, so you don't know. Yeah, right. Yeah, just like sometimes you'll see like three helicopters leave the White House. Pretty hard to pick up which one the president's in. There might be a decoy. Yes, sir. Yes. Mhm. That's a very tough question. Um, I don't. I think overall that what the authorities did in that day was excellent. You know, I think you'd have to be looking at, how do you lock up every classroom? I taught in Berkeley Hall. I taught evening classes from 7 to 9. How many entries do you have in Berkeley? You can put the president in an iron box. You can have the tightest security in the world, but unless you get the cooperation of the people, it's never going to work. So if you locked every dormitory, or dormitories are different, but every classroom had multiple entrances without easy access in and out, pretty soon you're going to have people propping open doors. I had at Ford. We had a worldwide access control system with cards. Yet my security people on patrol, you see doors propped open, and then when something happens, oh, we need security. You know, well, you have security, but you have to make sure even on an advance that your security is done so it's workable. Because if it's not workable, you're not going to get the cooperation of the user. If you don't get the cooperation of the user, I don't care what you do, it can be compromised. It can be broken down. Yes, sir. Well, what happened, remember that in Tampa, the president didn't want any agent on the back of the car. The car made the turn, probably made a turn about 5, 6 miles an hour, and was speeding up to get onto the expressway. So if you were walking alongside of it, you're going to have to get back on that that follow-up car. About you're probably operating a framework of 10 miles to 12 miles, and that's pretty fast trying to jump on it. So if the agents would have been in the back of the car, or the bubble top would have been on, it might have deflected the bullet, even though the bubble top was not bullet resistant. No, that was done before. That was done history for a long time. That was probably if you see Roosevelt, agents were doing that then. Well, no, by law, he can sign off. The president would. But he could sign off on it. The president would not do it. Maybe an ex-president would. But sometimes you're always jockeying back and forth with a staff on how close can you get the public, where is the press at, and what you have to do when you're doing it in advance is you have a certain buffer zone, and if you're doing it in advance and you give that up a little bit, the political advance person that wants this publicity for the president, the next stop, they're going to say, well, Rad Jones let us do it. How come you're not letting us do it here? So you have to hold a hard line. Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, it's done under. Well, I'll give you an example. President Kennedy, when he was at the in Cape Canaveral, one of the movements he was going to chop her out onto into an aircraft carrier and see a missile shot up, and that was all well and good. But it was raining and foggy, and didn't know whether we could make it. And the other alternative was going to go down in a couple of silos, which that were extremely dangerous. And he was told, "We don't want you to do it." And he said, "Well, I'm going to do it," because he wanted to. So he can overrule you. Fortunately, the weather cleared, and we chopped it out. Well, on a standard visit, it would probably be maybe 10 days, 10, 12 days. If it's like an inauguration or a convention in another city, probably be 4 months. Long time. Yeah, like during the couple of conventions I was involved in down in Miami, I was down there the whole summer getting that in place. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well, I had 7 moves in 20, 21 years back and forth into DC because you don't stay in protection longer than a couple of years. You move out because the stress and the demand that's on it. So you kind of move back. And I was fortunate. I had a great wife. And in fact, I remember I was on a trip and one of the kids had to go to the hospital with a bunch of stitches and all like that. She never told me until I got back because she said, "What can you do anyway except worry?" So that was good. But remember, you could get a call, Sunday morning saying, especially with LBJ, didn't give you a lot of notice. You have to make a trip in a Vietnam. He's going to see the troops, and that was you didn't have ATM machines, so you had $5 in your pocket. So that was that was kind of tough. Yeah, it's hard. It's done by law. It's done by Congress on the president, vice president, family, what have you. Now, with a candidate, what they do is there's a series of things like their the number of their percentage in the polls, how much money they have received in their campaign, are they a major presidential candidate? After LBJ ordered protection when Senator Kennedy was shot, we were protecting like 12, 15 people. In fact, we always joke because remember Pat Paulson, the comedian? He was running for president. And we always said, geez, it'd be fun to be on his detail. But, they did, but they were protecting everybody. And then they said, oh, this, you just can't do it, resource wise, personnel cost. And so they established a committee, leaders of the Senate and the House, minority leaders, and then another person, usually the Secretary of the Treasury. Ben. Yes, sir. No, I don't know. If he had his seatbelt on, difficult. Sometimes there's a petition in the car that can be shut off. Yeah. I don't think that was ever verified. Yes, ma'am. Well, you have to take a written test. You have to go through a bunch of interviews. You have to take a lie detector test, have a complete background, physical fitness test, and then a couple other interviews. It was over a year and a half. Used to, when I went in, it was a preferred a degree from criminal justice. Michigan State was one of the leading schools. Now that's not a requirement, which I think is good because you have people from political science, sociology, so it's maybe made you well rounded. Like my granddaughter, it's been a year in processing to become an FBI agent, and she's completed everything. It's been over a year. She's just waiting for her appointment to the academy. I couldn't get her in Secret Service. She didn't want to stand post. she, so it, but it'll be interesting because her dad was a federal agent and I was. So we're very excited that when she graduates, there'll be 3 federal agents. Yeah. So 20% of the Secret Service agents are female. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Well, you can see the difference between the British philosophy. I was over in London with my wife, and we went to the street where the Blair House is. Not the Blair House, but 10 Downing Street. And of course, it's all cordoned off now. So I went up and introduced myself to the Scotland Yard people and showed my identification, all like that. Said I'd been there with Reagan. I had my picture taken in front of the 10 Downing Street. And he said, "Well, just a minute." And he goes back, and about 50 minutes later, he comes out, must do some checking. He comes up, and he looks at my wife, and he says, "Well, how'd you like to come with me and get your picture taken in front of the Blair House?" So they start walking off together. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute. Can I come?" He said, "Okay, come along." But she never lets me forget that. She says, "You know who was important." All right. All right, thanks.